experienced. I wouldn't call you a journeyman, Andrew, because that wouldn't do you justice. But you've been in the publishing space for a very long time, and you're an experienced writer. And paired with Andrew for this conversation, we have Lester Walbrugh, one of the literary voices that I am most excited about. It's wonderful to have you here, Lester, and I'm very excited about your writing. I've told you as much. And Lester's definitely one of the authors that you should keep an eye out for. I think he's going to do big things. So no pressure.
No pressure.
No pressure. All right, and you've got the shoulders for it. You're stronger than you look.
What do you mean?
Yeah. So lovely to have you guys here. Andrew, I'll start with you. And you can keep this answer short, or you can make it as expansive as you want. It's been, how long has it been since you published in Yenzi? Just for the record, can you remember?
I think it's nearly 20 years. Can that be right?
I think it's about 20 years.
Wait,
Wow.
okay.
Yeah.
That makes me
Makes you feel a little bit old.
Yeah, so Yenzi was self-published in 2005. So yeah,
Almost 20 years.
Yeah.
It's probably one of your lesser known works, but I think still one of your best. It's about.
My favorite. So.
It's got a special place in my heart as well. You started off swinging for the fences. I mean, you didn't write a small book. In Yenzi was a socially conscious book, a heavy book, something that people can read and really have a lot to ponder. When you take on something, let's start the evening with that. The role of the writer as a socially conscious voice, writing about themes, the real world, engaging with real world conditions and realities. When you tackle a novel like in Yenzi and you write about a genocide, or a novel that is in many ways about violence and how people view each other, do you feel that there is a pressure on you to write in a certain way, to be emotive, to convince readers, or is it a more personal project for you when you write about something like that?
I think there's a social element to all of our writing. I think it's very difficult, certainly as a South African, maybe as a Scandinavian or an American writer, maybe you can write a book, pretty much impossible, not to bring your own perspectives of social issues and to bring social issues into it. But you can choose, obviously, how focused it is on those social issues. So if I write a crime thriller, you're looking at plot, you're looking at character, and maybe your social issues take a little bit of a back seat, but they're still there. When you write a book like in Yenzi, which was set in the Rwandan genocide, you've got to, I think, be very cautious about how you write it. So one of the issues that we have all debated in various forums is whose story can you tell? So can you tell a Rwandan genocide story? I'm not Rwandan, I haven't lived through the genocide. Can you tell that story? And I feel that as a fiction writer, yes, you can, that you can tell any story. I've now told a story set in Gaza. Can I tell that story? Yes, I feel that I can. I think that anyone can as a fiction writer. But you've got to tell it with integrity. So, no, I don't think you come to it with an emotive voice that's trying to prove a point. I think that's quite dangerous, unless it's your point. So if I'm writing a book about myself, perhaps I can come to it with a focus of trying to prove something, trying to say something. But I think if you're writing a story about other people's experiences, even though it's fiction, I think you have to be careful about your own emotive voice. I think you have to try, and it's never silenced, but I think you've got to try and keep it in the background so that your reader doesn't feel like this is Andrew Brown beating his drum on a particular issue, because I don't think anybody wants to read that. I think it's got to be more subtle than that. If you read in Yenzi, I think if you read Bitterness of Olives, I think at the end of it you get an idea of who the author is and what the author thinks about certain social issues. But I hope you don't feel like you've just experienced a lecture in social values, because then I've failed as a writer.
Lester, I've read several articles where you go in depth about your financial motivations for writing.
I want to make money, yes.
Yeah. That's the name of the game, right?
I thought I would make lots of money.
Yeah.
I didn't deserve that, but then again, I wasn't in the industry, in this whole, I didn't know any writers when I started writing. I didn't have anyone to tell me stop.
Yeah. And now
Now you know.
now you know.
Now I know.
Now
You've been cruelly
I've been hoodwinked.
cruelly disabused of those
I know.
passions. No, in all seriousness, as a fairly new writer, but someone who is very serious about their craft. Let's start with your non-fiction. Just kidding, no, your short stories. You wrote a debut, which I reviewed.
Yes.
And I remember describing it as Fargo set in Grabo.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how you felt about that, but I hope it gave you at least a slight wry smile.
Well, yeah.
What I enjoyed about those stories in particular was the fact that you wrote about a very specific place and time, but you broadened the horizons and that you had stories that were local and international in flavor.
Yep.
Is there a certain ambition to all of your writing, that you don't want to be stuck in one place one time, and that you feel you want to experiment a little bit? Because it was quite an experimental debut, I feel. What was that like? Are you a guy that enjoys experimenting with form and being playful in how you approach stories?
Yeah, definitely. Play, I mean, it should be play, I think.
Yeah.
I should be enjoying what I do, otherwise why do it, to start off with? And there needs to be a certain challenge and things that I want to get better at. And I like wrestling with the language. And those are all aspects of the writing journey once I start writing. In terms of where it's set, the stories, I lived in Japan for 8 years, so
That by nature makes you a very interesting person, I think.
well, I taught English, so I mean they bring it down a bit.
You should leave that part out. Yeah, I lived in Japan for 8 years.
You were a cultural tourist for 8 years.
Excuse me. But so I was interested in the culture. So for me, why I wrote both South African stories, or most or more pointedly Overberg, Grabo stories, is because I grew up there, and then Japan because I mean it's trying to make sense of things as well. I'm trying to make sense of my experience in Japan, see how once you write things down, you get a clear idea about how you view it and how you see it.
Did you find it a huge culture shock as a South African?
Not at all, not really. Well, when I got on the plane, I got into the train and went to where I stayed, everybody was wearing masks. My first thought was, like, there are lots of doctors in this train, because that's my only reference. That was my previous reference for masks. And
it was pre-COVID. Yeah.
Pre-COVID, I didn't expect that. It was just a stupid thought that came to me. That was probably the biggest culture shock. Otherwise, we're people. We're all people who live in the same planet, and I read a lot of books before I went to Japan, like other people's experiences, to prepare myself and all that. But I realized all of it was from a Western perspective and from a certain kind of viewpoint that didn't apply to me, because I come from South Africa. We've got thousands of cultures here, so I'm used to. We're not isolated. We're not in a so Japanese culture was just one more. I mean, like, we go to spa, we hear like different kind of languages every day that we don't understand what the people are saying. So no, it wasn't a culture shock. South Africa prepared me for that kind of thing.
Writing, of course, if you break it down, is always a kind of translation, right? You're always translating people's experiences into a kind of language that you hope will resonate with people. Why short stories to start off with, and not a novel? Because they're very different in my experience. Is there a difference in your process when you tackle short stories? Why short stories, do you think?
Short stories, they're short. they don't take up a lot of time, but they do actually. It's like, you know, it's like running a marathon. It's commitment. It's commitment. That's it. I have huge commitment issues with everything, and to, you know, attach myself to a short story is just more comfortable for me. And also, it's a challenge to get like a whole world in like 3,000 words and a whole story out in 3,000 words. So I enjoy the challenge in that, how do you say, brevity that short stories provide. Yeah, like.
Would you say you're a perfectionist? I think all
I am,
I think all writers are, but
Yeah, but I am. But yeah, I can let go also easily.
yeah. Which brings me to your title. I heard it in Afrikaans. It's Let It Fall Where It Will.
Laat het val wat
Right,
val.
maar Laat It Fall Where It Will is very Afrikaans. So there was a lovely bit of play there, and I think there's an injunction to the reader when they read it, you know, don't try and force the readings onto this. Keep hold of that sense of play and open-endedness. I really like that about both of your writings, that there is a sense that the reader is not being force-fed a lecture and a sermon and being told what to think, and that you can do that. Andrew, let's jump to the crime fiction genre. You've written a lot of crime fiction books. You've got a serialized character. How do you feel now about Eberhard February, and has he changed in the way that you view him? Do you view him in a softer or a harsher light? And maybe just speak a little to his character and who he is for you.
It's interesting that we started talking about it, the fact that it's been nearly 20 years of writing books, because it doesn't feel like it. And what happened with crime writing was I wrote in Yenzi, nobody wanted to publish it. The responses I got was, yes, this is very nicely written, but nobody wants to read about 800,000 people being killed in 100 days. Nobody's going to buy it, nobody's going to read it, so we're not going to publish it. So I self-published it. And it did really, really well. It was the only self-published book I know of that was on the bestseller list of exclusives. And I've got
That
photographs.
really is quite an achievement.
Yeah, I've got photographs of this rather badly printed, tatty book. And somebody said to me, it's a book of many parts, because when you opened it, of course, the binding fell apart.
That's a terrible joke. Never tell that joke again.
The parts in the toilet and the parts in the kitchen. And, oh, great. Yeah. So my next book, so I was never planning to write crime fiction, but I realized, okay, the kind of books I want to write, no publisher wants to publish, so I'll write something that publishers do want, which is crime fiction. And so Eberhard February was born, and Cold Sleep Lullaby was written, and it did really well. And then the publishers republished in Yenzi with a nice cover and a binding that didn't crack open when you opened the book, and it did very well. And what was interesting to me is that I was then asked to speak at various book literary events and things, and I was introduced as a crime writer. I was quite intrigued by that idea. So I didn't think of myself as a writer particularly. I mean, it's a hobby for me. I write on the side. It's not my career, it's not my job. I write because I enjoy writing. But I certainly never thought of myself as a crime writer. But every time I'm invited to any sort of literary festival, I've been invited to Kingsmead now in Joburg, and I see I'm on the crime writing panel. And I've only just, this book is still, hot off the press, but I'm in the crime writing. So, and I do understand it. It's that mainstream publishers, that's what they want, that's what sells, that's what works for them. It's not too adventurous, it's not too challenging or vulnerable for them. They know that they can get it out and sell it. It's a book like this, Bitterness of Olives, that frankly gives them the heebies, and they're not sure what to do with it. And Random House, who've been my publisher for now 17 years, dropped it. Having said yes and green lighted it, they dropped it. And Karina, the magnificent Karina from Caravan, picked it up and turned it into the beautiful book that it is now.
Wasn't it wasn't it written like 3 years ago?
5 years
ago.
5 years ago
already.
Random House said, look, we should try and publish it soon because it may not be topical much longer.
Sure.
And then said, actually, we're not going to publish the book. Anyway, sorry, I've digressed enormously.
Yeah. No, we'll get back to the whole 7 October thing a little bit later. Yeah.
Eberhard is, you know, Dion Meyer always says he lies awake and he worries about his main character in all of his books, and he worries how he's doing. Eberhard's a bit like that. You know, you think about him from time to time and wonder how he's doing. And you worry that you've subjected him to too much trauma. You kind of, I don't know, it's cathartic. You have this
And you
character-
started off really, really strong. You really put this guy through the ringer. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you make him an alcoholic and his marriage is in tatters.
And you set the book in Stellenbosch. I
And
mean,
you set the
and
book in
people call it the
Stellenbosch,
groene hel.
People
You
have
know,
been
yeah.
racist to him, but you know, you just give him like the hardest life that you can, and it's very, you know, it's very cathartic. I mean, I don't think you as readers understand that writing is very selfish. You write about what you feel you want to get off your chest, and then you impose it on you good people who have to spend money and read it. And he's softened over the years, and I've had this debate with Dion because his character has softened.
The love of a woman does wonders. Eh?
Yeah, and we've both been through divorce, and we've both found new partners, and we're both incredibly happy. And suddenly Eberhard has, in the latest book, has fallen in love. You know, where's that come from? I can't imagine. And the same for Dion. You know, he even proposed, and she accepted. You know, now 15 years ago, he would have proposed, and she would have said, "What? You're a alcoholic cop. I'm going to touch you with a barge pole." But now he proposes. She says yes, absolutely. Eberhard finds a social worker who he loves and falls in love, and it actually blossoms and works. So you can tell where the author is from where his characters are going. And Eberhard's having a much better life this time.
It's good. It's good to hear that he's
But-
doing well. Yeah.
I don't know if anyone's read Heistmen, but in Heistmen, at the end, there's the death of a very central character, and it's particularly sad and traumatic.
Yeah.
And that was written for my friend Anton Steenkamp, who was a judge who was one of my closest friends that died from a snake bite of all things. 4 years ago now, 5 years ago.
Sure.
And so the book is dedicated to him, and the ending of the book is dedicated to him. So again, writers come from their own personal kind of selfish needs. I had a need to work through Anton's death, and I did it through that book, and I did it through the death of a character in the book. And that's what we do as writers, I think. Yeah. Lester just said, "Now, I went to Japan, I needed to kind of work through my Japanese experience. There's a book, or there's a short story." So
I just want to
That's
say,
what's going
like Elton Baatjies, my novel is that's got nothing.
Hopefully he's not an alter ego.
of me is in there.
We'll really hope it's
Yeah,
not.
Yeah, come on, own up.
Yeah,
It's
no.
what you'd like to.
Yeah, that's a very, very dark
Really,
joke. That's
yeah.
very dark. Stellenbosch, where you're back. The town, for someone that's been living here pretty much all my life, I've seen the town change and grow, and everyone seems to have an opinion on it. As a literary space, before we move on to both of your other works, when you wrote Cold Sleep Lullaby, and you also had a present-day narrative with part of the book, and then you went into the past, the whole line of Stellenbosch developing as a town, a very, very compelling historical narrative. What was that like for you to do that deep dive, and was that crucial for you as a writer to really do research and ground yourself in a world that doesn't really exist anymore? I mean, you walk down the streets and you see the buildings, but Stellenbosch is not what it used to be hundreds of years ago. It's very, very different. So what was that like for you as an imaginative exercise?
I don't think Cold Sleep could have been set anywhere else. Stellenbosch just worked in a way that Cape Town could never have worked, and no other town that I could think of would have worked. I agree with you and I don't agree with you. I think that Stellenbosch has held on to some of its history more strongly than certainly Cape Town has. I don't know Paarl very well as a town, but my sense is that Stellenbosch probably has got that dichotomy between history and modern South Africa more
It's
than
a very
reality.
jarring kind of a conflict. I
Yeah,
think,
and it's to a writer, it's very exciting.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's like living here or being involved in the history and the evolving of Stellenbosch, but to a writer, it's very exciting. Yes, some of the book was set on Groot Constantia and the wine farms of the Cape. It was useful in the book, but it didn't really grab me in the way that when I came to Stellenbosch and I started researching the Eerste Rivier and some of the wine estates and where they come from and the Huguenots, and it all started to come together in this amazing mix. And yet you could walk down Dorp Street and see what was a very modern student town.
Yeah.
And that kind of jarring dichotomy was great as a writer.
That's interesting. Maybe that's why I started writing in Japan, because Japan has that same thing. It's super modern,
Yeah,
but still they hold on to
but
a lot
there's
of
lots of
Lots of
ingrained
traditions.
culture and
Yes.
tradition. Yeah. And I like that. Whereas Cape Town's so desperate to be kind of sexy and metropolitan and cosmopolitan.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's two Cape Towns, right?
Yeah, it's so split that if you're on the middle class white side, you could be anywhere in Europe or the Mediterranean, and if you're not and you're in the working class area, then you're in a fairly hellish reality. And there's very little of that enmeshing, and it just felt Stellenbosch had something different that was both good and difficult to come to terms with, but it was perfect for the book because those of you who will know the book, there's half of the book is historical. It's about slavery and where we come from and where the wine farms come from and all of that, and the other half is a contemporary murder that happens in Stellenbosch. And you do seem to have a lot of murders in Stellenbosch.
We do.
I don't want to step on any toes, but is that right? I'm not wrong about that perception.
Yeah.
Just like spectacular ones.
Yeah, we have a few, right.
yes.
Cape Town has
Yeah.
a hell of a lot of murders, but they're quite, mundane.
Yeah.
Stellenbosch does it.
It's the money. It's the money
the
that
money
does it.
that
It gives it that
comes
flavor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Lester, Grabouw is not particularly known for its literary output.
Well, we have
I'm
Bettina
going
Winter.
to put it to you. And then you mention the one-woman powerhouse. I feel that is Bettina Wijngaard.
Bettina
I think
Wijngaard,
Bettina is
yes.
absolutely fantastic, not only as a person, but as a writer. I think she's great. As someone who's located and based in Grabouw, Grabouw is also an interesting microcosm with a lot of issues that the country faces. It's quite picturesque in one sense,
Yeah.
and then it has a lot of social struggle and an underbelly.
Yeah.
What kind of impact or influence does that have on someone who's writing serious fiction that engages with real world issues?
No, yeah, it's troubling because there's a huge divide still in the town. Like what would you say? Like economically, I'd say it's very divided. Nobody really. There's no. It's a stark divide, same as Cape Town. You get the good parts, and you get the farmers and the beautiful houses, and then you get the middle, and it's like. But yeah, it's a troubling place. I think lots of troubles. This is always in the news. There are protests on the N2, blocked again. I applied for a job in Stellenbosch like 5 years ago, and they asked me in the interview, would you be able to get to work? Because they'd be burning tires, and I didn't get the job. They didn't like me. I didn't like them. We just didn't gel. It happens.
What was this job for?
It was for teaching English.
Yeah, I can see it would be a terrible influence on the youth. That was a
For
bullet that they
international
dodged.
students at the university.
Yeah.
Nobody interviewed me. Yeah, the interviewer here, maybe.
Yeah.
No, I was quite pedantic. Like they asked me, so are you going to travel to work? I said, no, I'm going to commute. Things like that, It was like,
You're just
Yes,
you just
you didn't
encouraged
really want the
them.
job.
You didn't want
You
this.
didn't want
I
didn't want
it.
this job.
That was the end of the.
You probably had some wine before you did that interview.
Yeah, it's for me it's trying to make sense of it because Grabouw's grown in the last since I grew up there. I mean, it's been 20 years maybe after democracy, and I'm trying to make sense of the whole town and its social aspects and how people don't like get together and work things out by themselves. There's still lots of hatred, lots of intolerance, prejudice, and and you're right. It's a microcosm of South Africa. So if you want to see what is probably the future of South Africa, look at the small towns, because that's where the stuff is first gonna explode. The boil is gonna burst, and that's why there's such a lot of trouble there. It's
I'm not going to let you off the hook. I've got a question for both of you. It's interesting that we've got an audience of almost exclusively women here, but they do seem to have a stomach for violence and fictions and things like that. So for two strapping young lads like yourself, you do tend to write intense, quite demanding fiction where the reader has to sometimes sort of take a step back and be like, okay, maybe this is fiction. We know that there's a very, very scary reality out there, especially writing in the South African context. But writing about violence, it's a topic that pops up in all kinds of festivals, conversations. I think especially in South Africa, I think we're very much not done with this conversation in terms of writing ethically and responsibly about violence. Lester, the violence in your book is a very particular kind of violence. It is not specifically violence against women. It is something else. It's something more hidden, more subterranean, if you will, something more insidious. It is the violence against probably the most vulnerable people and marginalized. How does one approach a topic like that? Elton Baatjies, without giving too many spoilers. I mean, this is a book about crimes against vulnerable people, violence, marginalization. As a writer, you want to write something that is nuanced and interesting and compelling for the reader and makes the reader think. It's not a sermon. So how do you write about a topic like that without being sensational, writing about violence in a responsible way? How do you start to do that, and how do you see it through? What happens to you while you're writing this process? How do you stay sane?
How do you stay sane? I just like, that's out, the jury's out on that one, like still. I need people to buy my book so I can go for counseling.
I think everyone in this audience will take 3 just to see you get your help you need.
No, it's just my own experience of growing up, being a gay person and colored in a small community. It's definitely, it's definitely not tolerated. Like within my own family, I still get, jabs and I can see they're gonna sit with me because they know, they've known me for my life, but then they'll make comments like, oh, there's a painting of a nude woman. I'm gonna get that and put it right at in the front entrance. When people walk in, they're gonna see there's a nude of a woman, so they'll know there's no gay people in this house. So that kind of throwaway comments.
That's very troubling.
It's very commonplace. I'm lucky because I'm still alive. There's people get killed every day, like those Tulbach murders, those young boys get killed, and they get killed because they're gay. They don't get killed. There's a guy in Makassar. He was an international ballet dancer or dancer. He got stabbed just for really big. It happens every day. So that was like the impetus for writing.
Yeah. So you,
like this,
when you feel it this close to home, it's a very, while being incredibly hard-hitting, it's also an incredibly poignant novel. It is very beautifully written and affecting, and it's sensitive, and it has texture and depth, and it's humane. because you are trying to write about people, right? They're not subjects in your book. They're real people because you're writing about things and people that you know and that you feel deserve a humanity. Andrew, you have written about all kinds of atrocities. And you have explored issues of the migrant experience, right? Genocide. You've written about a tremendous powder keg that's now very much exploded again. And you've said you doubt that there'll be peace anytime soon. I don't think there will be. When you have to write about volatile social contexts, how do you decide, first of all, what to write about? And this new book, where did the inspiration and the title, The Bitterness of Olives, where did that come from? I think it's got something very wry and very knowing about it. Where does your inspiration come from?
To touch on your question about writing about violence, I'm very aware that readership is heavily weighted towards women. So certainly in South Africa, I don't know around the world, but certainly in South Africa, the dominant readership is female. You've got to be careful about how you write violence, because we can all stomach a certain amount. We're all pretty robust. We're all used to a Scandinavian horror story. You know, you can do a good old, or Joe Nesbo.
Yeah,
or
very,
whatever.
very
You know, we can all
gruesome, yeah.
cope with a bit of chainsaw, and that's fine. But there's a point at which you've gone too far. And so, you know, one example that's very uncomfortable for me to talk about as a writer, but I think that we need to talk about it, is if I wanted to write a rape scene, for whatever reason, work of fiction, and I now believe that I need to describe a scene of rape, can I write it as the male character? I personally don't think that I can. It might be very interesting to be written from the male character's point of view, but I don't think I can do it. I don't think I can put myself into that character to give you, the reader, a fictional portrayal of what it's like to be a rapist. Can I write it from a woman's point of view who is being raped? I don't think that I can. I think it's a step too far in terms of whose story can I tell. If my rule is I have to tell the story with integrity, I have to tell that person's story with integrity, how can I write that scene? So in Refuge, there is a terrible rape scene, but it's a male rape scene in the prison. And I agonized over that scene. It gave me a lot of trauma to write that scene. And I've been in prison myself several times, so and I know what it is like. It's a very difficult piece to write, but in the end, so many people commented that that's for them, as difficult as it was to read, was the kind of central core in that book that held the other traumas together. So you can write it, but you have to, there are limitations, I think, on what any fictional writer can write with integrity. As to writing social novels and where the inspiration comes from, Inyenzi was written because I just felt like we had forgotten what had happened in Rwanda. It was 1994. We were celebrating euphoria in this country.
Yeah.
Mr. Bush had just invaded Iraq for the first time or the second time or whatever time it was. There was so much going on, and at the same time this small African country just went into complete meltdown. And something that has always fascinated me is why people are capable of doing what they can. I've worked in the gang unit for 10 years, and I now work in child protection as a police reservist. I've always been fascinated by why people end up doing what they do. And particularly in the gang unit, when you meet young men who were part of the gang, I've always been interested as to why they ended up there and why they didn't end up somewhere else. In Rwanda, I was fascinated by the fact that nurses, doctors, even priests took part in that genocide. They killed their neighbors. So one day you were a nurse looking after people in hospital. The next day you picked up a machete and you murdered your neighbor who you've known for 20 years.
Yeah, people becoming cockroaches.
Yeah. So you denature people and then you can kill them. So was always been interested about that. So my book on South Sudan was also about that. Why prejudice could reach a point where you could conduct yourself in that way. And the Middle East is no different, and Palestine is no different. You know, why good people who have good dreams for their own people and their own culture are able to oppress others with such violence. And there seems to be a disjunct there between seeing it. You know, I want the best for my nation, my culture, my people. That means you can't have it. I'm fascinated by why we do that and how we do that, and what divides us and how you build bridges across it. So I think that's probably what all three of those more serious books was about, was trying to understand what keeps us apart and what can bring us together.
Yeah. I think that's a wonderful segue to my next question. We've been speaking, you've mentioned 1994, you know, it's a marker for the country, democracy, all of that. We've got elections coming up very, very soon. I think many in this room would be quite undecided potentially about who to vote for. We're out of options. We are at a very, very troubling pace. We're probably at a even more uncertain point than we were in terms of 1994, in terms of where we're going. You know, in order to see a future and imagine a future. The job, if we can call it that, of a fiction writer, of novelist, right? In essence, when we look at the best capacity there, is to create empathy, right, and understanding. Do you feel, and this is a question for both of you, that there is a utopian impulse somewhere in your writing to imagine a place where we look at each other with more kindness, in a softer way, a more understanding way? Or is it a case of this country having too much division, too many problems, just insurmountable obstacles? And how do you navigate that feeling of wanting to write truthfully about a country that is beset by problems, but also wanting a better future and trying to imagine that?
You first, Les.
I know it's quite a tricky question. Yeah. I'm not sure what the answer would be, but
well, to say, like, you know, the role of the artist, if a writer is an artist, is to you know, keep a record of society and just like basically hold a mirror up maybe to see what this is. I'm not a social worker. I don't work on the ground. I don't, you know, I don't get my hands dirty. I don't do the real jobs that many people do, the real, you know, the real jobs. Because I'm sitting here, I wrote a story. But I like to think that I'm objective, an objective viewer about what's going on, and you know, fairly not at all emotional about it. When I say that, all of us probably need to have a look at ourselves, and you know, I'm not going to quote Michael Jackson, I promised. I'm not
Are you going to bring Man in the Mirror into it?
But it's something similar to that. I think we need to, like, we're not doing enough for the change. Like I was thinking earlier, yeah, the Rainbow Nation, Desmond Tutu, all of that. And yeah,
does that still exist?
It never existed. It was
it was good PR.
It was good PR. It's what we would want to be like 50 years, 100 years down the line. So it was something to work towards, rather than something that was. It was too easy. There's a lot of work to be done, and I don't think anybody is doing the necessary work which is, take a look at yourself, check your prejudices everywhere. You know, it's every day is hard work. Like, I look at myself. I mean, I grew up in an apartheid system. I am racist. I have, like, I probably look at a black person and see, oh, he probably can't do that job. You know, and I have to check myself. So I'm hyper aware of what my thoughts are, and I try to change that. I look at a white guy or a white woman and say, okay, she's not going to be able to keep her rhythm to that. You know, it's like, it's just stupid things that I grew up with that I need to check myself all the time. And I think people aren't doing that. And if we just too precious, we just think of ourselves as being too precious, our culture and identity. But you don't realize once you give up a lot of those things, there's just like a whole new world out there, you more than what you think you are, basically. What you allow yourself to be.
Andrew, I think we'll prod you for an answer there.
I think that in terms of the novelist's duties, if you want to read a depressing account of how terrible things are in Gaza, then go to Al Jazeera or go to a non-fiction book that tells you this is what Gaza looks like. Because then you know what you're going to get. I want to know how bad it is. Okay, this is what I'm going to read. If you come to a novel, I think there's a responsibility on the novelist to portray the trauma and the horror accurately. So, I mean, you cannot wallpaper over it and just to make your readership feel better. But I don't think that you can bludgeon your reader in a novel with a horror story of what life looks like. I mean, you can do whatever you like in fiction, but A, I don't think it's going to sell, and B, I don't think that that's very good writing. I think that you've got to have more nuance to that. There's got to be some kind of explanation that holds it together. And I think there's got to be some idea of light somewhere. What are you saying in your novel? A character that comes to a realization of their own prejudice. For example, so if you're going to write a book about, I don't know, abuse and prejudice, at some point someone in the book needs to give the reader an idea of what you're saying about how do you come right on this. Somebody's got to have some. Otherwise, I'm not sure why you're writing. What are you trying to achieve by just bludgeoning this, a horror story into your readers? So I think there's a nuance to what you can achieve. I think it's dangerous to say a writer has any responsibilities, because fiction is as wide as the ocean, and you can write whatever you want to, and some readers like certain things and others don't. But for me, writing you've got to deal with the social issues, but you've got to deal with them cautiously and with integrity.
Yeah. Can you tell us about your two main characters in this book? I find the combination of the two of them very, very interesting, and they're both very, can I use the word jaded? Is that an accurate word? Because they are quite jaded, they are quite disillusioned, but there is a searching for a kernel of truth and hope, and sort of just a reason for being that is more than just an acknowledgement of sheer horror and atrocity. These two men, who are they? What is their struggle in this book, and how do you then bring them together?
I think that they are both pondering how they've ended up where they have, and I think we do that as human beings. We do that all the time. Why am I here doing this? Should I not be there doing that? What brought me to this, and did I have choice? And I think for Khalid, who is in Gaza, his biggest question for himself is, did I have a choice in this? And if I did, why did I make this choice? Because now I'm stuck in Gaza, and I could have continued my career in Tel Aviv where he was, even though he's Palestinian. But because of familial pressures, because of cultural pressures, because of political pressures, he feels like a collaborator working in Israel as a Palestinian, and he feels that he has to do the right thing and move. And he ends up in Gaza, and it's the world's biggest prison, and there he is stuck, and he can't get out. And life is hell compared to what it was like. And he then has to ponder, why am I here? What brought me here? Avi is a retired police detective in Tel Aviv. He hasn't pondered his life much at all. For him, life was very clear. I'm a police officer. I am in favor of justice. I track down bad people, regardless of whether they are Arab or Israeli or who they are. So you can't call me racist, you can't call me prejudiced. I'm a cop on the side of what's good and right. And that's how he's lived his whole life. And increasingly, that narrative has started to crack, largely due to his son, who challenges him continually about, yeah, but this is as much of a choice as any other choice. And you are part of the security apparatus of an oppressive state. And you might try and persuade yourself that you're here for good and you're only looking for justice, but it's a lie, and you need to look, and you need to look. And that breaks his relationship with his son. And his son leaves and won't come back, and moves to America and will barely talk to his father. And for Avi, like we all do, he justifies, and his initial reaction is, well, his son is just, temporarily off the rails and doesn't understand, and he's just, being young and impetuous. But of course, it niggles at him. Why is his son saying this? What is the issue here? And it's only really with retirement and then the story that I tell in the book that he starts to think about, but I've also chosen a certain path, and I've also ended up in a particular place. And can I justify it? Do I want to justify it? Could it have been something different? So I think for both men, it's about contemplating as they get older where they are and what are they part of, and can they justify their prejudices or can't they? And is there a bridge to be built? Ultimately, is there a bridge to be built? I think if you've read the book, you'll know that in the opening sections there are scenes in Iraq where the Jewish who's an old lady in the book, but when she is young, she's born in Ramadi in Iraq, and she lives in an integrated Jewish-Arab community. Now that's a fact. That existed in Iraq. And that was not even 100 years ago. So in less than 100 years, we've gone from the ability to have an integrated Arab-Jewish community that worked to where we are now. And that for me is the most distressing part of humanity, that we move so slowly together and we move so fast apart. The building bridges takes so much time. The destroying them seems to happen in a flash.
Yeah, that's very profound, and I agree with you. Lester, you've now spoken about justice, Andrew. There is the question for the reader reading Elton Baatjies. There is this question, this niggling, unrepentant question of justice and visibility for these boys that are murdered in this novel and that are, for all practical purposes, basically invisible. When you are writing about a main character that is very much unsympathetic, has terrible character traits, is in many ways, it could be described as monstrous, right? Are you trying to humanize someone that's capable of such violence, and where do you manage to locate that search for justice? You've also got an interesting detective character, Jaffna. Can you tell us a little bit about him and about the kind of man that he is and his attitudes towards justice, working in such a context where there is so little that is materially changing, and there is so little hope in that context? I mean, we all know, Andrew, sort of the challenges that the SAPS that they face, the difficulties, right? Corruption, issues with manpower, institutional issues, all kinds of things, right? So in that context, you're representative of justice. So what is he like? Who is he? What motivates him?
The detective.
Yeah.
What motivates him? It's Lucky Butt's like, I didn't think a lot about the detective really. He was just a pawn. It was like, there has to be a detective, somebody needs to be on the case. But I think he represents good. He wants to do good. He wants to, you know, he wants to do his job well. So he represents the reader, really. Everybody nobody's gonna go for the, you know, the Elton, like, yeah, Elton go. So we needed that. But the first part of your question, I think, is interesting about how do you humanize a person like that, a serial killer, and. Just like Andrew said, it like these people, they have different intentions. They don't really know what they're doing. They don't really know how their actions affect the detective who makes all these decisions, but you know, at what cost and how many lives are being killed. So it's all levels of violence and people dying because of decisions that other people make, not necessarily for them, but societal decisions. I think the difference between RV and people who make, who's not directly, who doesn't take the knife or use the gun, is. I mean, I'm sorry, I lost my sentence, but I think Elton is more direct. A direct, how do you say, like, hoe kan ik het zeggen in Engels?
Sê maar in Afrikaans.
Hy is 'n inloper van wat
Is 'n embodiment.
Society, embodiment
Ja,
van die hele society wat die besluit te maak en hoe dit dan so. He represents, I think, in a bigger sense, he represents society as all. We're the guys who kill these people, because either we make the decisions that directly influences his actions, or we turn a blind eye to what's happening, and both are equally worse. So we have to do something about it. The thing about turning this obvious monster into a human being, trying to humanize him, is like, I think the first and the easiest thing to do is just look at them and say, yeah, they're a monster, and then be done with it, you know. But instead, with writing this book, I wanted to understand why. So I needed to grapple with, who's this guy? How did he turn out to be this serial killer? What happened to him? And those are the kind of questions that led me to a story and led me to his story. And in that way, I could not necessarily sympathize with him, because a lot of people go through the same things as he did, but we don't, you know, do these awful things to other people. But that question is still unanswered. But I think I wanted to humanize his experience and not just say that he's a monster.
Yeah. You've gestured towards the sense of place and context and environment. This is a question for you firstly, Andrew. You've written about very diverse contexts where atrocity takes place. Obviously more than that, but when you embed characters that are experiencing things, changing social landscapes, politics, things like that, obviously the sense of place is crucial. I think it's, as with non-fiction, right? If you don't get the sense of place as authentic as possible, the reader's not going to believe that it's credible. For you as a South African, when you write about a context like the Middle East, which is so volatile, it has so many different layers in terms of a context, how do you write an acutely real, how do you write a novel about a place like that, where it's tangible and the reader can feel that they're experiencing it with the characters? How do you make it credible and authentic?
I think Lester said something very interesting about going to Japan and not feeling that out of place. I think as a South African, this may be easier than if you were from a homogeneous society where all you knew was a particular way of living, and then I think it would be quite difficult to absorb. I think we're used to absorbing different cultures, different ways of doing things. We're interested in it, different foods. So I think maybe it's a bit easier for us as South Africans. I'm not sure. You have to go there. You have to spend time there, you have to meet the people, you have to eat the food, you have to do the footbeat and walk around everywhere that you can. For me, I can't write about it unless I've smelt it and tasted it and spent some time there. Gaza was a real challenge. You can't get in, you can't get out. So I spent a lot of time in the West Bank, I spent a lot of time in occupied East Jerusalem.
When was that? Was that quite recently?
Over the last 3-4 years, I've made several trips to the West Bank in particular, because that was the closest I could get to a feel for Gaza, particularly Ramallah. I spent a lot of time. Gaza we tried to get into unsuccessfully, got detained by the IDF on a few occasions trying to get in.
Well, it's good to see you.
Yeah, no, it's good to be around. I mean, they were just perplexed as to who we were and why I wanted to go in and what I was trying to do. And of course, they didn't believe anything I was saying. They were convinced I was there for some sort of nefarious reason, so hence we got detained. If you can't actually get in, then the internet is wonderful in that you can find accounts of life, you can find photographs, you can find maps. One of the things I do whenever I write about any town or city, if I can't walk it, then I'll go to Google Earth and I'll spend hours just looking at what does it look like from above. Is it a rabbit warren? Is it spaced out? What are the main highways, byways, and all of that? And just locate yourself geographically. Even if you don't spend ages then locating your reader geographically, at least you know it, you understand it, and then you can portray it. So it's got to feel like the real thing, and I'm hoping that this has captured what life is like, or was like, in Gaza before it got pummeled into the
After
ground.
I read that book, I needed to dust off the...
That's a good sign. Yeah. And then when you've got that space, then it's so much easier to put your characters into it. It's very hard to put your character into a space that you don't really feel, that you don't know. To go back to Dion Meyer, one of his nicest books I think was 13 Hours.
Yeah.
Set in Oranjezicht and gardens, and that's because Dion, he was living partly in that area, and then he walked the streets and went to the coffee shop, and then when he tells the book, you're like, I know that street. And you almost like you're reading a sort of really good piece of journalism. God, someone was shot in Pradar Street, really, and you realize, oh no, this is Dion telling the story. That's right. No one was actually shot in Pradar Street. And that made the book for me. So I think capturing the space is as important as capturing the characters as well.
What was the most difficult part of writing this book? I'm sure there were quite a few challenges, and
it was a very challenging book.
Yeah. What stands out?
I think the interweaving of 3 different stories was challenging but exciting for me as a writer. So there are 3 different stories, and they all have to connect. They all have to interweave. I loved that. I mean, I enjoy writing. I write because I love it. So I like playing with the ideas. I like playing with the characters. I like playing with the language. That was hard. And then obviously writing a book about Palestine, about Gaza, and getting it right for me. It may not be right for everyone, and some people have felt that the book is too heavily weighted one way or the other way. For me, it needed to be correctly weighted so that there was a synergy with my politics, my views. Not that I'm trying to push them in the book, but it needs to sit comfortably with how I feel about what's going on. And that was quite hard.
Yeah.
There's a scene in the book where Khalid is in Gaza and he's trying to get to Jerusalem, and he's blocked at a roadblock inside Gaza that is manned largely by Hamas youth, and they don't treat him very well at that roadblock. And I read, it's not a big part of the book at all, and when you read it, I'm sure it won't be something that you dwell on. I must have gone back to that scene I don't know how many times, just feeling I've got it wrong. It's too one-dimensional. It's too good guy, bad guy. It's not nuanced. And then I'd write it another way, and then no, that's too soft. You're not capturing the grit of it. So yeah, sometimes a small scene can just absolutely hold you. Whereas some of the big scenes came very easily because I could see, maybe because I could see them and I could just write them. So different things challenge you in a book. Sometimes not what you expect.
That passion and sort of investment, that emotional investment that you've made is so incredibly apparent on every page of this book. Reading it, and I had to review it as well, so I had to return to it obviously for the conversation as well. And
Beautiful review, thank you, John.
Your investment that you make, because you never go to a novel or come to a novel from a sort of entirely neutral place. You've always got an expectation. And especially because I'd read the manuscript years before, but not in a book form. And returning to the story with a context, and then reading it, and then seeing that it felt so true. And a book of fiction, it either has that feeling of truth, you know, or you feel, I don't buy this. This doesn't ring true for me. There is a question coming for both of you. The lyricism that you find. I'm sure you've been asked this before, Andrew, because you're a very lyrical writer. You spend a lot of time in your prose honing it, and your writing's very beautiful. But Lester, yours as well. In this book, you have incredibly jarring, upsetting, disturbing moments and characters, but there is something very beautiful and intimate and unsettling. And you can't really plan for this, right? Because it just happens. It's an organic thing. It's a novel. It's not a report or a non-fiction thing that you're just writing with an aim. So my question to you is about process. When you go and sit down, right? How do you do if we can call it a kind of a truth test? How do you test it and see that what you're actually writing, that it rings true, that it feels good, that it has that ring to it? You know, how do you know when something works, and how do you know when to abandon something altogether?
Come, Lester.
I don't know, man. It's a lot of moving parts.
When does it feel good that you know, okay, this is going to stay?
When does it feel good? After you've written it for the 50th time and went through it for the 50th time, then maybe it feels good. But still, there are some things that niggle still afterwards, after you've pressed send, and you're never going to be happy with the end product. I think I won't be.
There are no finished manuscripts, only abandoned manuscripts. You know that. So.
I think you've got to be honest with yourself, and that's sometimes difficult as a writer. But I think you've got to be honest. You've got to look at what you've written and look at it honestly and say, is that good enough? Is that the best I can do?
Does it get harder with each book to find that sweet spot? Is there more pressure, do you think?
I've learned so much from my editors, so much. I mean, editors are the unsung heroes as far as I'm concerned. You know. For the first 3-4 books that I wrote, I had the same editor. And she kept on saying, yeah, but you're doing it again. I've told you not to do this, and look, you're doing it again. You know, show, don't tell is one of her big things.
It's one of the big things, always.
And I struggle with that because it takes confidence to show and not tell. Yeah. So I want to tell you something. So why can't I just tell you? Gaza is this terrible place, and you know, why don't I just tell that? It's so much easier. No, but I've got to show it to you. And that takes more words, and it takes more energy, and it takes more time and imagination. But of course, that's good, you know, that's good writing, that's good editing. So she's 100% right. Also, I write these amazing soliloquies. When I write people having conversations, it's kind of a speech of 10 minutes, and then they give a speech of 10 minutes.
They are quite grand.
Yeah, and grand speeches with like clever vocabulary that you've never thought of. No, I mean, nobody actually speaks like that. And so if you're going to make it a realistic conversation, you've got to chop it up and cut it down and make it believable.
It can't be too neat.
It can't be
right? It's got to be a little bit
isn't someone
messy and
presenting
real.
false?
Yeah.
So you learn that over time. So does writing get harder? Yes, it gets harder because there's a burden of what's come before, and you're thinking, well, I managed to write quite a nice book last time, and I'm just not achieving it this time. Maybe I should just stop. So there's that kind of pressure, but it also gets easier because you've learned what works and what doesn't work. But you've got to be honest. I wrote a manuscript. I was very angry at one point, and I wrote a manuscript called The Imposters. It was a manuscript basically about the white middle class and how awful they are.
Well, you've kind of written that book. I mean, Refuge was kind of in that direction.
I was just angry. Okay, and I wrote this, and I knew it was terrible. I knew I was just pouring out all my kind of, and eventually there was this manuscript, and I gave it actually to Mervyn of the Book Lounge. And he read it and he said, "This is hilarious, but of course you do know that it can't possibly ever be published." I was like, "Yeah, I suppose." And if I'd been honest with myself, I would have just realized I was angry and stopped and gone and done something else. So, yeah, I think it's about looking at it with some security. Yes, I do know what I'm doing. Yes, I do know how to write, but this isn't good enough. I can do better.
Yeah. Has this book been a kind of a crossover, sort of a breakthrough in a new sense? Because I get the sense, looking at something like the Good Book Appreciation Society on Facebook, I don't know if you know the group, but there have been many posts about this book and a lot of very impassioned discussions and read this and it's great. And I get the sense also from people saying that they've never read your books, but now they're going to go back and read them all. Has this been sort of a kind of an eye-opener for readers, do you feel? And what then comes next? Are you gonna go back to Eberhard or?
That's the problem.
Yeah, because you can't really write Bitterness of Olives too. Yeah.
Short poetry is easier. It seems so short and just like a few words and then you're done. I think it was the timing on this book. I mean, what I was trying to do in this book is exactly what I was trying to do with Devil's Harvest about South Sudan.
That book kind of disappeared under the radar, and it was excellent. It was really
did
good.
Very well in Germany. It was translated into German. It did really, really well in Germany, but didn't do so well here. But I was trying to achieve the same thing. I was trying to tell a story about something that was happening that people weren't paying any attention to. In Yenzi was trying to do the same thing. Refuge was also trying to do the same thing. So it isn't anything different what I'm trying to do in this book, but obviously the timing was dramatic, shall we say.
It was quite uncanny, got to say.
So 3 weeks after the book came out, Hamas then moved into southern Israel. And I mean, Karina and I were in endless conversations about, okay, what now? The book is out there, we can't pull it back, but how do we deal with what is happening? And then Israel's reaction and the whole thing snowballed, and we had a launch and we nearly didn't have a launch. And then we had a launch with no questions from the audience because people were so polarized at that moment that we didn't think we were going to be able to handle that. And the launch went incredibly well, and the book has done incredibly well. But it was anxiety-provoking. We didn't know how this would be received. What's incredibly affirming for me, and I think for Karina too, is the number of readers who've said, and I've never had this really with any other books except my police books, readers saying, "Thank you for writing it." Now that's such an affirmation for a writer, for someone to say, "Thank you for writing this, I really found it useful." Not just, I enjoyed it. I was on a flight to Joburg and I read it and it was great. But to say that it actually made some kind of difference was really very affirming, and I think has made both Karina and I feel a lot more comfortable about the book being out there. There's been a little flack, but not much, not nearly as much as I'd expected. And maybe that's because the book is balanced, I think.
I think so.
In its view, and I don't think there are really grounds on which to attack me for the book. You might attack me for my views, but I think the book is fairly nuanced and careful.
Yeah. We could spend hours talking. It's been a fascinating, lively, really enjoyable and interesting discussion.